Hey, what's up you guys? You're watching Team APS, Paul here, and today I'm going to talk about staples in Yu-Gi-Oh! And where they are today. So, in my opinion, there are like 5 different types of staples, at least within the main deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! And those basically include mass removal cards, that's your Raigekis, your Dark Holes, revival cards, Monster Reborn, Soul Charge, those types of cards. Solemns or negations, but mostly solemns. You know, there's always a relevant solemn card, at least most of the time in this game. And then spell and trap removal, which is always a big one because we've had MST for a long time. We got Twin Twisters, and the newest one, hand traps. So these have actually been around long enough to talk about, so I decided to include them as well. We'll take these one by one, and at the end of the video, I want to hear what you guys think about what happened to each of these different types of staples, why they went where they went, where you think they're going. So let's get started with the first one, that is mass removal cards. So Dark Hole, Raigeki. Those are kind of the 2 things that come to mind when you think of mass removal cards. There are others though. There are cards like Torrential Tribute, cards like Mirror Force that have been, in and out of popularity, on and off the ban list. I think right now, it seems like mass removal is kind of not relevant, which is odd because, we're in this game where it's kind of all about making unbreakable boards of, many monsters, spamming them all out. So you would think that being able to use a Dark Hole or Raigeki to clear a field would be, yes, like please, everybody should be running this. The problem though is that most unbreakable boards come with insurance policies. So either they're going to have monsters that can negate everything you do, that's Tri-Gate Wizards, Odd-Eyes Vortex Dragons, whatever, or it's monsters that just can't actually be destroyed. So, if it dies, it maybe floats, or it's just like it can't be destroyed by card effects. If you've got nightmares pointing to stuff, and the co-link monsters can't die by card effects. So unfortunately, Dark Hole and Raigeki, they kind of are struggling. Now, a new card that's come into the fray in terms of mass removal is Evenly Matched. And it's a pretty controversial card, not as much these days, but basically, it can banish your opponent's entire field, nearly, face down. That's crazy. It's a very powerful trap, but it does have some really specific stipulations that set it pretty far apart from Raigeki and Dark Hole, in my opinion. Having to be activated at the end of the battle phase, and being activatable from the hand is awesome, but also banishing cards until your opponent controls the same amount you do means that you do have to take some risks with this card. You have to basically have nothing on your field for it to get the most amount of use, and that can mean you might actually end up dying. Your opponent might be able to OTK you without even you getting a chance to use Evenly Matched. But on the other hand, if your opponent goes first, makes a crazy board, you go second, you can skip straight to your battle phase, end it, and then use Evenly Matched. An annoying kind of, workaround that I feel is a bit unfair, but that's how Evenly Matched works. And I think that the benefit in Evenly Matched compared to a lot of these other forms of mass removal cards is that it doesn't destroy, and it also banishes cards. So, it's not even sending them to the grave, it is banishing them face down. It's so crazy, where they won't be retrieved anymore, and that's basically that. So Evenly Matched, quite strong, but a little bit more situational. I think it's the, mass removal card I see used most often, but even it seems kind of relegated to the side deck. A great pick against, say, like pendulums and stuff like that, and can be good for dealing with an extra link board, but still not worth it in the main deck because it is a trap, it doesn't progress your strategy, and the later in the game you draw it, sometimes the worse it kind of gets. So let's talk about solemn cards next. Solemn Judgment, very powerful card. It was actually at like 3 in the game for a little while, and then got limited, and even when it was a 1, it was a very powerful option. Basically, it lets you tell your opponent no on anything that they do, sort of. Not monster effects, but monster summon spells and traps. Which at the time when it was a really big card, like in the past, this was basically everything relevant. You can negate the summon of a boss monster, like Dark Arm Dragon, Judgment Dragon, BLS. You can negate, whatever spell or trap card would ruin your day. If you accidentally ran into a Torrential Tribute or Mirror Force, you can stop it. If your opponent happened to have some, mass removal card, you could stop it. And that meant that Solemn Judgment was just kind of the answer all card, and when you set it behind a field of strong monsters, it basically meant you would probably win that game. On the other hand though, it did get banned, and now it's honestly kind of been power crept. I mean, the card's back and it doesn't really see much play. It's okay for like protecting a board, I guess, but Solemn Warning and Solemn Strike are kind of the 2 new kids on the block, and these cards are definitely better. Solemn Warning stopping any type of summon or any effect that would summon means that you get a lot of coverage with this, and the 2,000 life points cost is easier to pay in the early game than Solemn Judgment is. It's limited for a reason, so I think that just makes sense. Now Solemn Strike, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's even less life points than Warning, and it can negate any special summon. I don't know why they added that in. Plus any monster effect, and these are all counter traps, so they're all quite strong. I think Solemn Strike is the best of the three, but none of the three actually really see much play right now. Again, we're in this period of time in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where it's all about those first turn boards and what you can do going first, how crazy you can go, how much you can explode. And Solemn Strike won't be useful in those cases. If you draw and your opponent already has a crazy board out, then Solemn Strike just doesn't do you any good. In a grindier, slower game, I feel like these cards would be much more powerful, especially Solemn Strike. It's a really good one-for-one type of negation, but they kind of have died off. I don't know if there's a future for Solemn cards. You know, it all depends on if this game can kind of like, you know, grind to a bit more of a halt, but it doesn't look that way. So it kind of feels like Solemns are out the door. Now, Monster Revival. This is something interesting because Monster Revival walks this thin tightrope in Yu-Gi-Oh! Where obviously it can't exist in mass. Soul Charge was at 3 for a short period of time, and that was insane. Monster Reborn has been banned for years. But on the other hand, it's actually kind of balanced today. Monster Reborn has recently come off the ban list, and as you guys can probably tell, it's not even actually played in that many decks. Like, a lot of combo decks will play Monster Reborn just as a basic extender, but a lot of decks aren't using it. I mean, Pendulums, for example, have no need for Monster Reborn, and a lot of other decks just like because it's not necessarily a play starter card, they still choose not to run it. And Soul Charge is kind of the same way. I mean, there are decks that can really overextend even more if they have copies of Soul Charge. It's the popular card you see in every combo video where it's like, OMG, crazy hand plus 17, because they open with, you know, optimal stuff and Soul Charge to repeat all the things. So Soul Charge is very strong, and Monster Reborn is very strong, but I actually don't know if I would call them staples. I think they're staples among most rogue decks, but actually at the kind of higher levels of the game, they seem to be a little bit like, you know, not necessarily like take them or leave them type of cards. Another cards like World Legacy Succession kind of acts as a Monster Reborn in a few decks. And Call of the Haunted and Back to the Front and just aren't even cutting it. They're traps, they're too slow. It's a bit of a shame because I remember a time when like Call of the Haunted was like limited or whatever, and now this card's at 3 and it just cannot like keep up. It's just not fast enough. It seems like for most decks, targeted Monster Revival is more valuable. That's the Trickstar Reincarnation Revival effect, Goki Rematch. Those types of cards seem to honestly do more for a deck than Monster Reborn and Soul Charge do. So a little unfortunate, but that's kind of where those are right now. Now, as for spell and trap removal, it's kind of an interesting story. MST was for the longest time the base form of spell and trap card removal. But now we have cards like Twin Twisters, cards like Unending Nightmare, Heavy Storm Duster, Hate Trunade. My personal favorite is actually Cosmic Cyclone. I like the banishing effect. I find that fun because there are a lot of spells and traps these days that like have some graveyard benefit or they get something when they're destroyed. So Cosmic Cyclone's also cool. I feel like though the problem right now, of course, is that spells and traps themselves, like traps mainly, aren't played. Back in the day, the idea of being able to destroy your opponent's trap cards, especially the turn they set them when they couldn't chain them, was great. But now no one sets traps. Like I said with the Solemn cards earlier, there's just not enough time. If your opponent's committing all their resources to the board in their first turn, then running traps like Torrential, Mirror Force, Solemns won't do you any good. It doesn't help against an established board most of the time. So because people aren't running trap cards, it doesn't really make much sense to run spell and trap card removal. Now, these cards can still be good against Pendulum decks, and they are still good if you're playing against Altergeist or like Paleos to some degree, but those decks aren't actually all that common right now in the competitive scene. I think, though, that at the lower levels of play, like kind of in the more Rogue and Tier 2, Tier 3 categories, spell and trap removal is pretty important. A lot of those decks will have their own sort of themed spell and trap cards they need to stay in the field. For example, Fire Fists have like Tinky, or Madolches have like Ticket and stuff like that. So, you know, being able to destroy those cards is valuable. And I'll be the first to say, I was really excited when Heavy Storm Duster was announced because it was like a +1, you know, back removal card. And that kind of like feels like broken. Like, oh, Heavy Storm was also really strong. But it's balanced and it's a trap and it hasn't really caught on very much. If anything, the way to deal with like trap cards now is like Red Reboot and stuff, just to outright stop them from your hand rather than even having to commit the deck space, because like with just about every other staple on this list, these staple cards don't progress your strategy forward, and that's probably why they're not popular. And last but not least, there's hand traps. So hand traps actually, you know, right now they're obviously very infamous, but I mean they joined the fray a long time ago. technically DD Crow is one of the earliest hand traps that people use. There have been things like, Puppet Plant and Kinetic Soldier that have popped up, Gores and Tragodia if you count them. Effect Veiler obviously popularized hand traps as well. But I think that it kind of comes down to now the fact that because it's all about going first and going nuts, having hand traps is the only way that you can actually play Yu-Gi-Oh! If you're going second. It sucks, I don't like it, but that's where we are. And Ash Blossom, Droll, and Lockbird, they're kind of leading the pack. Not far behind them, we've got like Ghost Ogre and Ghost Reaper, and it's like, My gripe with hand traps really is just that they require so much deck space, yet they're kind of a necessary evil. Sometimes you'll see these decks where they're running like anywhere from, 6 to 12 or even 15 hand traps. There's counterplay to hand traps, but like half of them are hand traps. Like Psyframe Gamma is kind of an anti-hand trap, but it's a hand trap. So like, And there's cards like Called by the Grave that are used to counter the hand traps. The thing is, I don't know, the hand traps, they're the most useful type of staple right now, but they're also my least favorite. They're the type of staple that I wish Yu-Gi-Oh! Never got to the point where it like mandated these. That's where we are. I honestly, Ghost Spell is the newest one. She hasn't caught on too much, but like she kind of has. She'll probably get better as time goes on. We'll see. I don't want more hand traps, to be honest. I feel like we have more than enough. So I hope that in the future we don't get more hand traps, but who's to say? It's Konami's plans, not ours. So those are my thoughts on the sort of state of staples in the game right now. What do you guys think though? I would love to know. Let me know in the comments. Where are your thoughts on staples? Where do you think they stand in the game right now? Do you want to see them be a more prominent force? What do you think it's going to take to get them to come back? All right, it's going to be it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Pass turn.